Good afternoon. Welcome to the third edition of Lisbon Law and Tech, the annual event offered by the Knowledge Institute of Abreu Advogados. All sectors of the economy are being digitally transformed and important regulatory questions are arising. At the same time, technological innovation is changing the legal practice landscape, and lawyers should take advantage of it for the benefit of their clients. This year, Lisbon Law and Tech will still be held online, but I hope that next year we all can meet here in sunny Lisbon. Please join this discussion and share your thoughts and ideas on social media. Thank you all for joining us for the first day of the event. Please note that the following sessions will start at 3 p.m. Lisbon time. Today's panel will focus on the future of the legal profession and the role of Robolawyers and Lawtechs. Ricardo Henriques, partner with Abreu Advogados, is going to host the session, and he will introduce our very distinguished speakers. Ricardo, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Luis. It's a pleasure to be part of this inaugural session of the third edition of our annual Lisbon Law and Tech event, in which we will have a unique panel of speakers. I will start off by introducing our panel, Roland Vogl and Mark Cohen. Roland Vogl is an academic, lawyer, and entrepreneur who, after more than 20 years of academic and professional experience, has developed a strong expertise in legal informatics, intellectual property law, and innovation. He is currently the executive director of the Stanford program in law, science, and technology, and a lecturer in law at Stanford Law School. He has been focusing his efforts on legal informatics work conducted at the Center of Legal Informatics, CodeX, which he co-founded and leads as an executive director. Mark Cohen is the CEO of Legalmosaic, a legal business consultancy that provides strategic advice to corporate legal departments, law firms, legal service providers, legal networks, entrepreneurs, and law schools. He's also a co-founder and executive chairman of the Digital Legal Exchange, a unique global not-for-profit organization created to teach, apply, and scale digital principles to the legal function. Mark also holds a position with the Singapore Academy of Law, where since his appointment in 2018, he has served at its inaugural Lifted Catalyst in Residence to advance innovation in legal delivery and education in Singapore and the region. Hello, Roland and Mark. Welcome and thank you for being here with us today to share your experience and thoughts on this important topic of Robolawyers, Lawtechs, and the future of the legal profession. Roland, I would like to start off by asking you to give us your views on this topic based on your experience in your work at CodeX and Stanford, and we'll then move on to some specific questions on the topic. Could you please start?
All right, great. Well, thank you so much for having me. Can you hear me and can you see my slides? Yes? Okay, good. All right.
We hear you good.
Well, thank you for having me at this event. It's a real honor to be here. And I want to start off with just a few slides just to set a little bit of context, and then I'm looking forward to a spirited discussion on the various topics. So I run a center here at Stanford called CodeX, the Center for Legal Informatics. We are a joint center between a computer science department and a law school with the mission of bringing information technology to the legal system, to all stakeholders in the legal system, not just legal professionals. Our motto is legal empowerment through information technology. We are, like I said, here at Stanford, there's a beautiful picture of Stanford. We are also a community of folks who are entrepreneurial and who are leading the charge in different areas of legal tech. And so some of those startups that you see here either came out of our own research or were started by some of the entrepreneurial fellows affiliated with the center. So we have a broad umbrella, but our focus is on what we call computational law. That's a sub-branch of legal informatics that's concerned with the automation of legal reasoning. So what that means, it's the computer is used to give us answers, give us legal answers, and not get us legal documents like legal information retrieval systems do. And that's not a sort of a panacea for every area of the law, but it can be very effectively used in areas like compliance management or things like systems like TurboTax that most people know in the US and use to declare the taxes. Anyway, so that's all I want to say about CodeX at this point. But let's start with this concept of the robo-lawyer. So I would say about 5 years ago, there was a lot of coverage around AI and the looming disruption of the legal profession. There's been a lot of coverage in media about this disruption, and robo-lawyer has become sort of the symbol of this disruption, this concept of the robo-lawyer, and just to sort of like to explain it a little bit more, what that means, at least in my mind, is it's a sort of a catch-all concept that stands for a number of different technologies that we see used in legal settings today, and that break into basically the rules-driven technologies, AI technologies that use symbolic AI, logic programming, also sometimes referred to as good old-fashioned AI, so deductive systems, to do things like to create systems like expert systems like the TurboTax I already mentioned, legal chatbots, or computable contracts, so self-executing operationalizable contracts. That's where we use good old-fashioned AI, and it's still very much in use, and there's lots of things to do with it, especially also when it comes to the concept of explainability of how some systems work. That's where we need things like good old-fashioned AI. And then, of course, there are the data-driven systems, which have been all the rage in recent years. Statistical AI, natural language processing, machine learning, neural networks, to create products for the legal industry like data analytics systems, predictive analytics, used to predict how judges will decide on a particular case, e-discovery, and contract analytics to identify contracts, and specific risks in contracts and things like that. So when, as lawyers, we look at those systems, I think automatically ask ourselves the question, well, are they lawyer enhancing or lawyer replacing technologies? And so I think that's what, at least on a subconscious level, that's what most lawyers that think about whether they should use the technology, that many lawyers ask themselves. And that begs the question, what do human lawyers actually do? And it turns out it's a whole range of things that human lawyers do, and they range from very complex stakeholder negotiations and managing stakeholders to data processing tasks, pure data processing tasks. And I think that's where when we think about technology and its potential to disrupt what lawyers do, that's sort of what we have to keep in mind, right? There's certain things that technologies can clearly do better than human lawyers already, and certain things that will remain in the domain of the human expert lawyer for a very long time, if not forever. Now, more currently, I think the concept of the robo-lawyer is still being used, although somewhat less. I see it somewhat less in the media. But the Joshua Abreu, who's this very talented legal technologist, started a company, Do Not Pay, that you may have come across. Apparently, recently they were valued at $210 million. They got investment from one of the most prestigious Silicon Valley VC funds, Andreessen Horowitz. And if you look at their website, they have a ton of different things that help end users, consumers, navigate the legal system in some form or fashion. But if you look more closely at it, I think it's not really so. It's systems that help you go through different workflows that already exist out there, but they're painful to go through, like filing a lawsuit, a small claims lawsuit, and things like that. That this company has just aggregated a lot of grievances that consumers face and created an easy interface on them. If it's a robo-lawyer in a sense of, having human level intelligence is another question. So some people have thought about, what are the sort of the areas of the human lawyer that are more resilient to the disintermediation by the robo-lawyer. And this Professor Bradley from Cornell in a recent publication said, fact investigation, negotiation, client counseling, strategic advising, court appearances, of course, they remain solidly in the hands of the human lawyers. But anyway, so I think there's folks out there in the research community, in the AI and law research community, who are thinking about building machines that can actually pass the bar exam. If you look at that as sort of the actual measure of like a robo lawyer having sort of human lawyer capabilities. So well, let's look at the bar exam, and there's this community of folks who've been researching, specifically how to pass the Japanese bar exam, which, as I understand, is one of the hardest bar exams in the world. At CodeX, we've been wanting to do a bar exam challenge too, and invite the community to, create a machine that can pass at least the contract portion of the U.S. bar exam. And I interviewed people what they think about that, and in a tech community, and there are folks who say, oh yeah, sure, like 3 months of a concerted natural language processing research effort, and we can do it. And then there are others, including our research director, Professor Geneseret, who says, well, this will not happen a very long time, because you will need, for the typical bar exam questions, you will need an ontology of the entire world for a computer to deal with the many sort of common sense reasoning requirements that are necessary to answer the typical bar exam questions. So in summary, I think the concept of the robo-lawyer is a useful metaphor for a variety of narrow, so-called narrow AI applications handling different legal tasks. There is no robo-lawyer at this point in time with artificial general intelligence, is a human intelligence. And actually, if we look out there, I think most AI applications used today are used as lawyer enhancing rather than lawyer replacing text. So let's talk about the legal tech industry for a little bit too. So that's been exploding, of course. There's a lot of innovation in the space. We have a database here that tracks early stage companies that has over 1,800 companies in it now. And there has, of course, been consolidation in recent years. Some of the, so there's some companies, including the alternative legal service providers that are sort of scooping up some of the interesting legal tech startups in different areas. And from a customer's point of view, law firm lawyers and corporate lawyers, they find themselves somewhat overwhelmed with the offerings in the market. And so we're seeing that some of the big information companies and others are creating platforms where they are vetting some of the many players in the industry and sort of reducing the search costs, in a sense, for the customers. At the same time, giving access to a large client pool to some of the participating smaller legal techs. And there have, of course, been setbacks too in the space. So there's been much covered, some very sort of highly covered failures, like Abreu Legal, which raised a lot of money and then failed to succeed. They had a model of sort of a law firm and tech firm bolted together, and it just didn't scale. And I'm sure Mark has some very interesting insights on what the reasons are why that didn't pan out as discussed. But it is an interesting concept, and I think one of these days one of those players will succeed. Anyway, so let's keep talking about the challenges. Most law firms still resist change effort, right? There's structural issues with that. They view technology as an expense and not an investment into the future. And so it's a bit of an uphill battle. And then just on the technology side, for many years, this sort of machine learning and natural language processing has been hailed as like, sort of the, being able to do things that, to create a robo-lawyer, right? But there are technical challenges, and it's not, the technology is not at a point where it can actually extract the legal logic from documents, right? It can produce some impressive results, but this concept of legal argument retrieval, which is sort of at the cutting edge of technology, that this is still sort of a research area, and the technology is just not there yet. Also, to get, it's just, if we talk about predictive analytics, to be able to do good predictions, you need good data and structured data, but most of the data in the legal industry are still in unstructured form. And so, anyways, just to summarize quickly, there's certainly an increased willingness to invest in legal tech, and this is happening around the world. Legal departments and law firms are overwhelmed with offerings in the market, and we see more and more new platforms. All right, just a few words on the future of the legal profession. I think, let me start with a summary for the legal profession, as in sort of law firms. For most law firms, legal tech is still not an essential, right? And it is surprising to see as to how many law firms still sort of operate based on sort of the billable hour model. But from the client's perspective, the legal services are no longer differentiated. Although I think we're entering a phase where, clients are maybe gravitating towards the more technically enabled law firms. And so innovation is generally driven in this space by corporate legal departments and groups like the Corporate Legal Operations Consortium. All right, so I think what law firms need to do, and also corporate legal departments, is to think about how they can, where they contribute, where they're adding value today, and where can they contribute value tomorrow. And it's good to start, I think about what clients and attorneys want today. And clients want, as always, they want more for less and fast turnaround. They want to work online, and they want transparency and predictability. And I think that's really absolutely critical. But also attorneys, they want to be able to scale up their practice as needed, work with with other attorneys in other areas, and also they want to work from home, which of course now after the pandemic is even more so than ever. And I think law firms have to get in on this game, like, how do we turn the traditional one-to-one model to a one-to-many legal services model? There will always be that bespoke model of legal services, but there's an increasing number of areas where law firms can generate value by creating a one-to-many legal services. Anyways, and so that's my quick intro, and maybe I'll just kind of stop the share here. I promised I'll be short. I hope I was brief enough. But
thank you very much, Roland, for those interesting opening remarks and the summary of the various topics that we're dealing with. Now, turning to Mark. Mark, you've been very active in advocating for this digital legal transformation and the creation of a data-backed culture with the new digital legal talent. Can you give us your initial comments and insights, and also comment on this presentation from Roland?
Sure. I think that Roland covered the waterfront in a remarkably succinct way. I agree with most of his conclusions. I would just say, Ricardo, directed to your question, no question about it. I think that artificial intelligence will play an increasing role in the legal function. I think that it's kind of a little bit sensationalist, if not intellectual clickbait, to say at this point that the robo-lawyer is going to replace the lawyer. I think that for a good while anyway, and I would defer to Roland in terms of any kind of a time frame for this, but I would imagine that for the next at least couple of decades, the robo-lawyer will basically be yet another form of disaggregation from things that once passed for legal functions, but really could be done by others, whether it's machine or those who do not have a law license. I think that in terms of data, there is no question that lawyers have long been giving judgments by anatomical parts. How many times have you heard a lawyer say, my nose tells me this or my gut tells me that? But try going into a corporate boardroom and starting your presentation by saying that your judgment is governed by an anatomical part as opposed to data. It will not end very well for you. So I think there is no question to Roland's point about clients want and customers want greater predictability, greater speed. These are things that I think are within our grasp, and it should be for those purposes that I think that the focus should be. Which brings me to a larger point in terms of talking about technology. And Roland mentioned that there are about 1,800 or so legal tech companies out there. I think that speaks more than anything to the immaturity of the legal tech market. I think that we're going to see a consolidation in due course, but I think there's a tremendous amount of enthusiasm, which I think is great. But I think there is a certain amount of naivete that a lot of these startups, are trying to sort of recreate a wheel that has already been created, or could very possibly collaborate their resources and talents with others. And I think that collaboration is something that is increasingly important, whether it's in legal tech or whether it is in the legal supply chain. One to many, that slide I think that Roland, you showed, is very, very important, because I think that the legal function is very much going from a zero-sum mindset of, you're either going to do the work or I'm going to do the work. And I think that increasingly it's going to have to be, we are going to be doing the work depending on our skill sets, depending on our infrastructure, depending on a lot of things. But the central point that I would want to make is that any resource, whether it's technological or human, has got to be fit for customer purpose. I think that is something that the legal function has got to, begin to appreciate. That tech, tech for tech's sake, it matters very little. Just as data that is not measuring something worthwhile measuring, that has little relevance to outcomes that are materially going to impact end users, are not really terribly important. So I think that there should be a fit for purpose standard that is going to govern technology as well as deployment of human resources. And then finally, I would say that I would not mistake Plot, which I think is a great organization doing something very fundamental. I would say that legal operations, which is finally becoming mainstream, certainly among large corporations. I read that for companies over $1 billion of annual revenue, which obviously is a very small percentage of overall companies, but nonetheless, 97% of those companies now have at least one legal ops person. Some obviously have larger departments, but I think the keys there are that legal ops is a first step towards putting the business of law into the mindset of every legal function. and that it is encouraging the legal function to work at the speed of business, using the language of business, using some of the tools of business, being data-backed as business clearly is. That is, I think, a very good first step. But I think business increasingly is looking for the legal function to do more than just, sort of basic business housekeeping. I think that the business community now, which is, you look at large companies today, they are already well along their digital journeys. That goes beyond robotics, that goes beyond AI, that really goes to human beings and human behavior. And human beings look at how they can reimagine and do things differently with the technological tools, with the data and the human resources of multidisciplinary workforces that are ultimately going to drive better and more predictable and cost-effective, accessible and transparent services for customers. And that is really, I think, ultimately the challenge of the legal function. It is, how do we better serve those in need of legal products and services? How can we do it more efficiently? How can we do it more cost effectively, et cetera? And I think that is ultimately the challenge of the legal function, because make no mistake about it, technology and data are the backbones that are allowing change, but human beings and an adaptation of human behavior are what is ultimately going to drive the change that is going to benefit customers, at least at this point in time. So Ricardo, I'm going to pass it back to you.
Thank you. So going back now to Roland, I would like to ask you, in your lectures, you state that the legal field is already predominantly data-driven. However, you said more than 80% of existing data is still considered unstructured data, which prevents the further development of Lawtechs in the data analytics field. Is this really the biggest challenge for creating Robolawyers, structuring the data?
So I think it is the accessibility of data. So yes, so it's the legal profession is still for the most part, and the legal the art of dispensing legal advice is still mostly a language-driven, a human language-driven art, and that's, to access that knowledge represented in human language for computers is a non-trivial task. So we have advances in natural language processing that are very impressive, that allow us to do conceptual search and things like that already. And with BERT and GPT and these latest technologies, there are quite some impressive advances. But for the most part, it doesn't give us sort of the accuracy levels that we need to make legal decisions that we are comfortable with, right? Like if you have 80% accuracy in a legal decision, right? That's impressive for a machine learning system to get to 80% accuracy, but it's not enough for a legal setting, right? Like, is that, we're 80% sure that person, committed the crime, he should go to jail. That's not satisfying. So anyway, so that's a challenge. And I think, yes, it's true. The more, data we have in structured form and in clean form, the easier it will be to have legal applications work with those data. But I don't think it's, if creating a robo-lawyer is really sort of the end goal, as you seem to suggest by your question, and I'm not sure whether that should be the end goal. But but there are other, sort of, obstacles, I think, from a technical point of view that we still have to overcome. And one is that, there's so much in making legal decisions. We need so much common knowledge and context awareness that is just at the current technical, with current technologies, just not possible to create. And so that's why, if anything, those things that currently are giving that label of robo-lawyer are basically workflows for different legal areas that we have a user experience created around it that is accessible and affordable for end users, right? But it's not a computer who has a general representation of the world and the law, and it can apply the law to any given fact pattern. That's why I said this is mostly narrow AI. It's not general human level AI. And so I don't know if that answers your question, but for instance, we're working currently very much focused on this area of computable contracts, especially in the insurance industry. And here in insurance, the product is, the contract is really the product that's being traded. And we're looking for ways to express, the typical human, the concepts, the legal concepts that we see in insurance contracts in a form that computers can reason with, right? And that's, you need a language to do that and a program to do that. And so that's, that's what for us is currently a focus area. Once you have that, right? And we're not there yet, there's still a lot of work to be done. And it's also very context specific, because a contract for health insurance is very different from a contract for car insurance or homeowners insurance. So you need a separate ontology for every area. And that's very time consuming and labor intensive. But anyways, once you have that, then you can, all the data are going to be in structured form. So you're capturing all the data in structured form. And then sort of downstream from that contract, as we see, there's going to be lots of new opportunities to do better data analytics, because you're capturing the data in structured form from the moment the data get into existence. We call that correctum capture. So just a final thought. So for us, computational law, like I said, the automation of legal reasoning is sort of the focus area. But one important sub-form of that is what we call embedded law. And so embedded law means bringing the legal information to the human decision maker at the point where he or she needs it. And so I see a lot of efforts and interesting systems that are doing that, right? So one of our, sorry, I digress, but the classic example for that was one of our early projects, which we called Project Calc, Computer Assisted Legal Compliance, where we thought about how you can bring the construction and zoning rules and building code rules into the software that architects use to build a house, right? Because at the moment they're building, and then they have to look up the code, they have to send the plans to the city, and it takes weeks to get an answer. And so anyway, so once you embed the law in the system that people use to make decisions, then you can really sort of be much faster and get into compliance much faster and save a lot of time and save a lot of waste, basically, avoid a lot of waste. And we think that approach is useful in so many different other areas. If it's for consumers and end users in many different areas where the law has implications for their actions, or for legal professionals, right, as they're creating legal work product to bring the law to their decision point, is going to be very helpful. And anyway, but that's short. That's not a robo-lawyer, right? This is computational law, it's embedded law, it creates a lot of value, but it's not a robo-lawyer.
I totally agree with what you were saying. Of course, no, we're not seeking to obtain that end product of a robo-lawyer, but just, of course, taking advantage of the technology to enhance the.
No, but it is a useful metaphor. A robo-lawyer, I think, is a useful metaphor, and it helps us get, to have interesting conversations. But it's just a metaphor at the moment.
Thank you very much. Mark, in a recent article, you identified a certain failure of law operators in general to harness the power of data analysis and mining. In one of those, among those reasons was the insular and lawyer-centered culture and certain technological primitivism. You then propose a series of paths to be followed and in a way to overcome this failure. Overall, on a scale of 0 to 10, what would you say, or what would you believe to be the current status of the market to this path, either the US market or any other that you could have?
Well, before giving you a number, let me start with what I think the real challenge is. The real challenge is culture. The real challenge is a different way of thinking about what is the purpose of a lawyer, and what is the end game of a lawyer. And my simple answer to it is a lawyer today is not just providing legal information, which for a long time was more than sufficient. Because as Roland knows better than I now, there are many different ways that one can get information from machines. And they're quick, they're reliable, they've generally been vetted by lawyers. And so it's no longer about a lawyer giving information because, as I say, that can be obtained many other ways. Now, where the lawyer comes in is where there is a question of whether or not that information applies or pertains to a particular situation is a different issue. Then you get into more of a question of interpretation, and that's where the lawyer comes in. So I just want to, and I don't want to digress from the question, but I do want to circle back on, I think, an excellent point that Roland made in his last response, which is it's not technology or a human being. It's technology and a human being, at least for now. It is a human being's willingness to say, okay, there is technology out there, regardless of what type it is, that is going to allow me to give advice that is faster, more predictable, more cost-effective, more data-driven. These are all, I think, the use cases that I was talking about in my penultimate comments, and what Roland was just talking about in terms of, here's a use case for it, right? Here is something that is going to help the human being. It's not an either-or situation. I think that a lot of people, who write about this industry in an effort to get attention, sensationalize, this is it one or is it the other? This is very emblematic of, this zero-sum mindset that is so pervasive and remains pervasive in the legal industry. And I think getting back to the question that you posed, Ricardo, and what I said, is that lawyers have really got to start challenging the way they are functioning today. They've got to get rid of the lawyers and non-lawyers. That's rubbish, because to deliver adequate legal products or services today, you have to take a far more holistic approach. particularly in the corporate realm, where you're talking about, challenges that have they implicate many different fields, whether it's computer science, whether it's engineering, whether it's business organization. It's not just a simple process. And so lawyers have to begin to cooperate and collaborate with other fields. Likewise with technology, lawyers have to begin to say, look, to be able to discharge my ethical responsibility to competently represent a client, particularly a sophisticated, digitally mature corporate client, they have to use the same tools that client is using to be able to conduct business and to assess risk, not just from a legal perspective, but from a multidimensional perspective. These are some of the things I think that are really challenges to the legal function. We're looking at it through the narrow prism of the way we've always done things, but the world is changing very rapidly and very dramatically. And yet we're not. It's not that we don't have access to the same tools. It's not that we don't have the ability to collaborate with other fields. It's just this cultural, I think, resistance. And I think, to be blunt, it's largely driven by two things. A hubris that law is somehow special, and the myth of legal exceptionalism, that we are the chosen field, that we are smarter than everybody else. They can't understand what we're talking about. That's ridiculous. We have to start talking the language of everybody else. That's point one. And point two is that we have to, as lawyers, begin to recognize that it's not what we see as being so important that really matters. It's what is ultimately going to be impactful and actionable for the users, the consumers of our services. That's what matters. And you look at any business and you say, what is the hallmark of a digital business? It's being customer centric. It's not looking at it through the prism of this is what I sell. It's a question of I'm going to sell that which the customer wants and needs. Okay, that is a mindset shift. And I think that the legal culture, which is vastly overlooked as the most important change impediment, legal culture, I think should be taught, it should be discussed, it should be revisited in terms of how it aligns with customer needs in a digital age. And I think too many people place too much emphasis on the tech alone. Tech is critical, no question about it, but it has to be contextualized and it has to be related to the willingness of humans to understand how it fits in as one of several resources that are going to be required to satisfy the needs of legal consumers and people who are desperately in need of legal services and products in the digital age. So to answer your question, I'd give it about a 2 out of 10 right now. And I'm sorry to be so negative about it, but I rely more in terms of what I'm hearing the corporate C-suite say in terms of where lawyers are relative to where the C-suite now expects them and needs them to be.
No, I understand perfectly, and really, there's more to legal tech than just technology, as you said. There's a change in culture that needs to be set underway in the legal field. Roland, back to you. I'd like to ask about the example that you talked about in your initial presentation, the case of the company Atrium, and that raised large funds from investors and announced a drastic change in its business model, but then failed to achieve scale in the automation of legal services. Do you think this was an isolated case, or that there will be more cases like this? And what does this mean? That legal services will always need the human and depend on the human resources, as I heard also Mark tell us?
Yeah, can I, if I may, just sort of
sure.
Respond to one of the things. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I just want to respond to one of the things that Mark said before. I really love everything Mark said. It's so apropos and so true. And I also see this sort of the culture change is the biggest challenge for the legal profession, right? I mean, you can bring about change in different dimensions, right? You can change your management, your operations, but the culture change is really the hardest thing to do, but the one that creates the most long-lasting change, and most valuable change. But my experience has been, I've been a consumer of legal services for a startup that I'm involved in, and chose a firm which is considered one of the more technically progressive firms, big international name, and they use a platform to share the legal work product, right? So there's a platform that's accessible to both the law firm as well as the client to have access to the legal work product. That's already an advance. But I noticed that I was charged 0.3 just to get the password for the for the platform. And I was like, just flabbergasted. It just captured that how hard that changes, right? Like, well, there's an associate who has a mandate to capture his time, because all his incentives are sort of based on that, right? And the firm is tech enabled because they're using a platform, but they're charging time to send me the password, the login for the platform. So I won't name any names, but otherwise quite happy with the firm. But it's not just respect. I'm sure this is happening across the board, and it's just I think it's a great example for how hard that changes, right? But anyways, to your question on Atrium. So I don't have a very studied kind of response to that. From what I understand is, they try to create a sort of a flat fee model, which is great from the customer's point of view, right? From a startup point of view, and they had expensive lawyers involved, and that system also allowed people to call up the lawyers, and they came with very complex questions. It took up a ton of time, and so the lawyers were getting engaged in a very bespoke kind of lawyering at a flat fee, and that did not scale. And then the founder, who's not a lawyer himself, is more of a sort of a Web 2.0 kind of entrepreneur. He just kind of lost the desire to try to crack that nut. But there's other, and I would be curious to learn more from Mark, because I think Mark has a much more nuanced understanding than I have from what went wrong with Atrium. But I always think that other models, so there's a few other examples of law firms that are tech enabled, and in the US you have this kind of regulatory challenge here, right? You can't share profits and so on. So they have this kind of dual function. Some of them I think are doing fine, right? I don't know quite what the reasons were why Atrium didn't succeed with it. So again, this is more of a Mark kind of question. But the model that I think is interesting is one that actually there's a company, there's several companies now that focus on a specific niche, like let's say startups and their legal needs, right? And they have a whole panoply of typical legal needs, like advisor agreements, board consents, employment agreements, NDAs, and they have a nice workflow for each one of those. And you can use that service, and the content is sort of credible content because, the founders are they were big law lawyers. And so you have a feeling that the legal content is adequate. And there's 50 different workflows for what you might encounter as a startup, and you're paying a $3,000 flat fee a year. And so this is very disruptive to law firms, right? This doesn't, address every situation, right? It doesn't tell you, can you issue options to employees in China, right? You might still need to hire that lawyer in China, but for the plain vanilla 80% of the things that you're facing as a startup, this platform will do for you, and that's and you don't need to use a lawyer. And that's very disruptive to law firms. And I think law firms should get into that game, right? They should get in on that game, right? They should do things like that. But anyway, so that's all I have to say about Atrium. It was disappointing, I think, we were all cheering for them, but it was also maybe a good lesson to be learned for our industry. But I'm curious to hear what Mark has to say about it.
Well, go ahead, Mark. Do you want to comment on that?
I'd be happy to chime in. I do know a little bit about it because their founder, Justin Kahn, reached out to me when they started. And the reason he reached out to me is not because I'm the oldest person he knew at that time, but because I had, back in 2007, started a company called ClearSpire. And we were the model upon which Atrium was built. Now, remember, this was now almost 15 years ago. Because of the regulatory limitations that Roland adverted to, we created a so-called two-company model in ClearSpire, where we had a law firm and then we had a legal services company. The law firm engaged solely in the practice of law. The legal services company had a very robust technology platform that even today, 15 years later, would probably be considered state-of-the-art. But more importantly than the technology platform was that we aligned the interests of our lawyers with ClearSpire, and we aligned the interests of ClearSpire with our customers by having simultaneous contracts that said, this is the scope of work, this is how long it's going to take, this is who's going to do it, and these are going to be the deliverables. I used to call it the general contractor model. And we were the general contractor. We did it on a fixed price. And by the way, it was remarkably successful. 98% of our engagements we brought in within budget. And so we also had organic diversity, I call it, because we were working largely remotely. And that, I think, attracted a number of people who wanted an alternative to the big law firm model and yet a very sophisticated practice. We really pioneered a lot of things that I think even today, regrettably, would be considered very out there. And it worked. The problem was that in our case, I provided both the legal expertise, and I was actually helped. I did not do the actual construction of our tech platform. We had a team of 90 developers doing this, but I was the use case end user. So I would tell our development team, this is what I want to do, and let me see how you construct it and how we might improve it. So I don't want to get too bogged down in ClearSpire, but to say that The Economist, the Wall Street Journal, everybody thought we were the next big thing. Unfortunately, if you're interested in hearing a true, sort of business monograph as well as personal confessional about what I learned from the experience, not just as a lawyer, but as a person, just Google Mark A. Cohen, the ClearSpire story. You might find it somewhat entertaining. But to go back to Justin Kahn, if I were to be honest, which I try to be these days all the time, and candid, I would say that they didn't have the depth of legal knowledge that I think might have been helpful to them. And they kind of had the Silicon Valley hubris of, oh, well, I've had a tech success. How can law be too much different? So I'm just going to snap my finger and it's going to work. I was rooting for them. And it doesn't mean just because they did not succeed that the idea and the model, as Roland said, doesn't have, I think, a lot of opportunity. And indeed, I think the market is moving that way. And you have companies, for example, like United Lex, which has done some very large managed service agreements. And now increasingly the big four are doing that kind of thing, where de facto they are separating into two different entities, the practice of law with everything else involved with the delivery of legal services. So I think it can be done. One more quick note, I'll just say, and then I'll shut up and Ricardo, let you get back to your questions. But I think, without naming names, I think that Roland was, sort of adverting perhaps to companies like LegalZoom or Rocket Lawyer. And I am a great fan, and I will just tell one very quick story as why I am a fan of LegalZoom. One Sunday, my wife, who runs a very successful executive search company, had a client in a particular jurisdiction in the United States, and they needed her to turn around a contract on a Sunday. She turns to me and she says, well, you're supposed to be a smart lawyer. At least you were in your, for years. So how do I put together this contract? And I said, is this a state university? And she said, yes. And I said, well, there are probably going to be some peculiarities that require, someone with a knowledge of that particular state. Of course, I can help with basic contractual terms, but I'll tell you who would be better than me. Why don't you go to LegalZoom and see what you can find? Well, 20 minutes later, for $45 with 7 clicks, my wife had a contract which she produced, shared with me, and I said, this is about 90% there. It's really great. And it covers all the key points that you need to have. Now, why is that significant? It's significant because if she had relied on a traditional law firm paradigm, try getting a law firm or a lawyer on a Sunday. Then you'd have to get a conflict check. That would take at least a day. Then you would have to, negotiate an engagement letter. That would probably take a couple days. And by the time you're finished, she had a need for something immediate. Even at 10 times the price, it wouldn't have served her needs. So there is a perfect example of how for discrete functions, sometimes good is good enough. Now, I know a skeptic would say, well, yes, but not everybody has a husband or a wife who's a lawyer. That's true, but that contract had been vetted by lawyers. So I think that is an example in my mind of how it's not a question of tech or lawyers. It could be both. And it's really dependent on what the use case is and the needs are of the client. So with that, Ricardo,
Thank you for that example. I really do think it shows that there's something to improve, of course, in the provision of legal services. I'd like to ask you also about something you talk about in your articles, which is a certain reimagination of the lawyer and the upskilling of the legal profession. What do you think are the most essential skills that lawyers need to develop to achieve that transformation that we were talking about just now?
That's a great question. Well, first of all, they have to be inquisitive. And by inquisitive, I realize that most lawyers are focused on the work in front of them, and they will typically say, I don't have time to learn a new skill, or I don't have time to read about what's going on in the industry, or I don't have time to read about, macroeconomic things that are changing business. I'm just, focused on what I need to do. But make no mistake about it, people who say that, and it's understandable, and I don't mean to be dismissive of it, but if you want, sort of career, if you want more career options and you want more to, as best you can, insulate yourself from redundancy and make yourself more marketable, it would be the following. I think that you should be, at least at a macro level, understand what's going on with business. Understand how business is transforming. What does customer centricity mean to business? How is business using data to actually enhance customer experience? How is business collaborating sometimes with people with whom they're in competition with? In other words, they are very fluid in terms of their relationships. And these are all things that are clearly going to be impacting what a lawyer is and what a lawyer will be. And so that's a start. And then I think one of the great paradoxes of this age, I'm really interested to hear what Roland has to say about this. I think he may agree with me on this, is that, people seem to feel that technology is somehow going to make wholly irrelevant the human aspect of being a lawyer. I would argue just the opposite. I would say that one of the things that still separates machines from human beings are the so-called soft skills of human beings. Empathy, an ability to collaborate, although now I understand machines are increasingly collaborating and speaking with each other. But collaboration, teamwork, and I think these are all skills that are vitally important to lawyers. I would argue that they've always been, but somehow they've gotten lost in the shuffle. And I think that so soft skills is really important. I think another thing is, as I said, curiosity. If you want to be a little more practical, I would say understand it's now a competency requirement in the United States, and I think about over half of the 51 jurisdictions, that you don't have to be able to drop a computer on the ground and put it together in 15 minutes. That's why God made teenagers. But what you do need to be able to do is you have to be able to understand how technology can be applied effectively to the delivery of legal services. You should also have, you don't have to be a data analyst, but you have to have an understanding of how and why data is going to be very important in terms of the delivery of legal services. You should understand business basics in terms of business speak. You should speak and write in plain language. I studied Latin for 12 years, but now I am finding that I am scrupulously avoiding Latin phrases wherever possible, whereas when I was younger, I used to think it was neat and cool to drop them, particularly in federal court. It's not particularly. And so I think, you know, and moreover, I think, you know, I'm not going to say read my stuff, but take a look at what, you know, there are a handful of really thoughtful people out there who are, you know, talking about changes in the legal industry, you know, and have a look at that, because that is definitely, whether they're right, they're wrong, or somewhere in the middle, which is more likely to be the case. These are at least serious attempts to try to look at things with all due respect, Roland. A lot of law schools today are just not teaching people because very few people who are teaching at law school have had very much serious practice. And I think that one thing that law schools should teach, and one thing all lawyers should take is, you know, and there's so many great on-demand courses now that are coming out. I want Coursera to get into the legal business, but there are others who are doing this. You know, is that start looking in terms of what do clients want and what do clients expect from lawyers? Because at the end of the day, it's not what I say that's going to matter. Or anyone else in the industry, it's what are the customers saying? And I spend a lot of time with the C-suite and GCs of some of the largest companies in the world. And I can tell you that their notion of what a lawyer should be today, they must be proactive, they must be data-driven, they must be tech-enabled, they must, you know, sort of read circumstances and situations well. You know, and they must, you know, they must get right down to what is it that they can do to advance customer interests and objectives. That, I think, those are things that every lawyer today, whether you're on the verge of retirement or whether you are early on in your career, I think you'd be doing yourself a favor by investing some time and energy in some of those things.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. Roland, I don't know if you want to comment on any of this.
You know, it's hard to disagree. And, you know, I think from my perspective at CodeX, you know, we feel that every lawyer today needs to know at least the basics of legal informatics. And that means being able to look at a legal situation or legal workflow through the lens of an engineer. That doesn't mean that you have to be a programmer, but to be able to kind of speak that language. I realize, I mean, the soft skills I think are important, but I think, you know, what I think is also important is sort of for, you know, what sort of differentiates the human lawyer and is sort of the context awareness that's very difficult to replicate and, you know, for machines. And that means that you have, for your client, you have very deep industry expertise, right? And you understand the client situation. And then in addition, you know, like that goes back to this lady a few years ago from Michigan State. She came up with this T-shaped lawyer, right? You have to have the deep domain expertise, but also the legal process engineering expertise and the business process expertise, you know. You know, I think, yes, law schools are trying to figure out, they're experimenting with how to teach, you know, sort of this, you know, kind of the technology for the law, you know, to law students. That's difficult. It's not the natural thing that law schools do. Law schools are better at teaching the law of technology, right? And there's so many exciting topics coming up, you know, from, you know, AI and sort of the automated decision making and the black box algorithms, and there's a ton of legal and policy issues, and that's the more natural topic for legal scholars. Then, you know, okay, how do you bring sort of technology to your future practice in law? But anyway, so we've been thinking about that for a while. It's a question: do you integrate it in every subject? Do you create like a general introductory course? You know, do you teach computable contracts in your basic contract course? Do you teach e-discovery in your civil procedure course? And, you know, sort of, there's a lot of experimentation going on. And, you know, we have several faculty members here who do, you know, who know how to do machine learning, and you know, we're building tools and things like that. But yeah, anyways, I think there's interesting things happening, but there's a long ways to go for most law schools.
Roland, I wanted to ask one question, if I may.
Sure.
You know, in terms of the teaching technology, for example, why not go, you know, across the street to the engineering department and, you know, because in virtually every other discipline, as you know, you've got, you know, students from one school going to another school. Why do you think that law schools are generally loath to do that? And their approach is, no, we can do it within the confines of our school. Doesn't that go to legal culture?
Well, I think it does. Yes, as the legal exceptionalism, maybe. Not every university has, you know, both a law school and a great engineering school. And you know, I think my center is very much a joint center between computer science and law school. You know, there were structural issues. You know, until a few years ago, we were in the semester system. The rest of the university was in a quarter system. But you know, we certainly have law students go out and venture into the engineering school to take courses there and get credit here. We have a dual degree program here now for the JD and MS in computer science. And we see more and more students from the computer science world to come to the law school. That's a fairly new phenomenon, that they say, oh, we have all these great techniques that we've learned in computer science department. This law stuff, that sounds like an exciting application area. You know, there's a lot of unstructured information, you know, that you can use what we've learned here to have impact on society. So that's also happening. So it's going both ways. And I think universities would be well served to try to support that, right? And here it grew organically, I think, but it is hard to do that by fiat because you need the buy-in from the faculty and so on. But, you know, it's happening, but law schools are certainly not the fastest moving players in this ecosystem.
Could I just then ask both of you on some final remarks for forward-looking comments in terms of the hottest topics or the most exciting developments you expect for 2022, both academically or in terms of the business development on the legal side? I don't know, Mark, do you want to start off?
Sure. I think that everyone listening in, if there's one term that I would exhort you to become familiar with, it's digital transformation and what it means to business. Because I am pretty confident that that is going to be the greatest driver of legal change. The legal industry is basically being reshaped from without, much more than from within. And I think that the legal industry, the challenge is going to be, can we adjust quickly enough to align ourselves with business, to speak the language of business, to operate at the speed of business, and to satisfy the needs and objectives of a digital business, which is totally focused on its customer. I think we're also going to have to, and earlier today I was talking to the global legal team, a very, very large multinational company, and we got into, they're an energy company, and we're getting into, for example, the impact of ESG. You know, the environment is just, you know, going to be hugely impactful to them. These are things, you know, that lawyers continue to be much more reactive than proactive. And so I see an acceleration of the process of the C-suite putting demands on general counsel, to sort of reimagine how they do things. And in turn, I think that's going to filter down to law firms and into legal training, legal education, and legal upskilling. So I would say it's my biggest trend is going to be the acceleration of the impact of digital transformation on the legal industry.
Roland?
Yeah, so I think we will continue to see evolutionary change and not revolutionary change. I don't think we'll see a big disruption in one area or the other. I think there's a lot of interesting things happening on sort of, all the new ways you can use data and derive insights from data in the legal side. I think there's interesting, this whole world of the no-code platforms. That's, that we'll see more of that. And you will see in, maybe not next year, but in the not too distant future, you will see computable contracts in the insurance industry. And that's hopefully then gonna come into other areas too. So you will be able to do queries on your phone and say, well, is this medication covered by my health plan? That's currently impossible to do. You have to call up 50 people, and we're working to solve problems like that. So anyways, I think we've only started to scratch the surface. I continue to be excited about our space and innovation. It's happening, although incrementally. And I think it's an exciting time to be a lawyer, and I feel it's I feel lucky to be kind of a lawyer and be involved in this kind of legal innovation space. This is for me to in spite of all the frustrations.
If I may, two things you said that really resonated with me, Roland, just now is number one, you're devoting your energies to problems worth solving, right? That's number one. And number two, I couldn't agree with you more. Almost 50 years ago, I'm sorry to say, when I became a baby lawyer, I had a really good education before I became a lawyer. And I was a very inquisitive guy. And I thought that becoming a lawyer was like the most intellectually stultifying experience I could ever imagine in the very early days. Fortunately for me, that got better. But I think that going 50 years now, there's so many more possibilities for young lawyers and for people from other professions to come in. So I couldn't agree with you more, Roland, that for all the doom and gloom that people like to say, I think it is a fabulous time to be in the legal industry, whether you're a licensed attorney or not.
Thank you very much. I was just going to ask a last question about the effect you believe the pandemic has had on the industry and on these developments of legal tech. Do you think this has been an accelerator or something that marked a change that we'll see more coming because of the pandemics?
Is that to me, Ricardo?
Yeah.
Well, don't take my word for it. The CEO of a little company called Microsoft was essentially asked that question about 2 quarters into COVID. And his response was, we have seen 2 years of digital transformation in 2 months since COVID. So I think sooner or later that is going to have to hit the legal industry upside the head. I'm kind of surprised it hasn't yet, but I think it will. So the answer is, Ricardo, emphatically yes. It's going to greatly accelerate things.
Yeah, I do think that we're already feeling that somehow. Well, thank you very much, Roland and Mark, for your thoughts and insightful remarks on this important topic. Change is underway, certainly, in the legal profession, but I see from your remarks there's still a long way to go in this legal tech topic. Thank you, everyone, to everyone that has been watching us, and please be sure to attend also tomorrow's debate on legal innovation trends. Thank you very much.